Hello and welcome to this week's Tip of the Week with Stephanie Lillian. I'm Stephanie and it is so great to be with you here today. Today's question of the week is, how can I learn how to balance in tree pose? That is an awesome question. As always, love answering your questions. Tree pose is an awesome foundational pose for learning how to balance and to eventually work up to more intense, if you will, standing balancing postures. So tree pose is a great place to start if you're learning or want to learn how to balance on one foot while standing. So before we jump in, as always, with any posture that we're trying to quote unquote achieve in yoga, the goal is never the posture, it's the journey, if you will. So rather than beating yourself up because you're not where you think you should be, because you want to be able to stand up and balance, but your body isn't quite there yet, that is okay. It's about finding love for your journey, meeting yourself where you're at today, because it's when we continuously show up and meet ourselves where we're at today, aka, in other words, find love for what our body can do right now. That's when the beauty of yoga and the journey begins to unfold. So hopefully with our time together today, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks of where to meet yourself so you can begin to build the strength and flexibility to hold tree pose. But again, you are perfect just as you are in your journey today. No need to achieve anything to get anywhere in life, because you can find peace and happiness and love for your body right where you're at. So on that note, when beginners start in tree pose, one of the most common reasons it is difficult to balance is actually because of the flexibility of our feet. So there's about 20 muscles in each of our feet, and when we don't use them or balance or stretch them out frequently, those muscles tend to get short and tight. So if you imagine the arch of your foot, let's say it's open and flexible, you get that nice arch, kind of semicircle type look to it. However, when we're not balancing and we're not working into the feet frequently, that arc begins to start to flatten out because those muscles begin to tighten and get a bit shorter, which makes it in turn difficult to balance. So again, when you're starting your journey, you have to be very patient with yourself and meet yourself where you're at today. Your feet will eventually open up and become stronger, but that takes showing up. It takes a routine practice. So to start your journey in balancing in tree pose, I'd like to suggest that maybe you start by a wall or a chair, something that you can maybe place one hand on. The first step to tree pose is standing with your feet hips distance and all 10 toes pointing forward. Now maybe you begin to rock forward and back and you just start to feel into the feet. So in yoga we like to describe the feet as having 4 corners, if you will. So there's 2 corners on the tops of the feet by the balls of the feet, so right, left, and then also the 2 kind of back corners of the heel. So maybe you begin to kind of feel into that by rocking forward and back. Maybe you lift the heels, lift the toes up, and just feel that grounded stance. The second point, as with any balancing posture, is finding a drishti or a gazing point. So you'll want to look on the ground and find somewhere to look at that's not going to move on you. That'll dramatically help your balance. From there, the first step to tree pose is, if you're doing this with me, shift your weight over toward that right-hand side. So you'll just want to shift the weight over to that left foot gets light. So maybe you can just kind of hover it or glide it on the floor next to you. This, my friends, is a perfect place to start playing around with your balance. Something just like this. Maybe you're brushing your teeth in the morning, or you're standing doing dishes, and you just kind of put your balance on one foot and kind of sway the other foot side forward and back and just get a feel for balancing. Maybe you have a chair, or I'll scoot over a wall next to you. Now, if you are using a prop like a wall or a chair, try not to really put your weight into it, but flutter. See if you can make the hands light. Maybe you lift it up. Maybe you put just a tiny bit of weight there. We don't want to become dependent on props. Okay, so we have the foot just kind of slightly lifted. We're looking at a gazing point. Hand can totally be by the sides or on the hips. Part A of tree pose is simply opening the hip, so you draw the knee out to the side and place the heel right at the ankle. So notice here, my toes are on the ground. This is an awesome place to start in tree pose because you have a little kickstand, if you will. We're focusing on opening the hip so that left knee's drawing out. Notice I'm not pivoting around my standing leg. I'm keeping both my hip points forward and just opening that knee to the side. So again, you can hold onto a prop next to you. Maybe you work on lifting the hand. Hands can be on the hips, heart center, or you can grow them out like branches. So this is a perfect place to start. I always like to tell my students that your breath is the perfect gauge for knowing how far to kind of go in your body. Whenever you get to the point that you lose that connection between the inhales and exhales, feeling your breath, and you're focusing more on the body, like falling out of the posture and coming back in, you've gone a little bit too far. You want to be able to stay in the posture and focus on your breath. That is the pretty little perfect point where you're building strength, you're still present, and you're working in the body with where you're at today. So if you've practiced, you work on each side, you work on maybe kind of making those toes light on the ground. So notice they become light when I shift my weight over to the left-hand side. The toes really rest on the ground when I shift my weight over to the right. So maybe you play around with that, maybe for some weeks, for some months, however long it takes for you to feel present in the body, to be able to focus formally on the breath rather than the body and balancing, if you will. Part 2, once you've kind of worked that, is coming up and placing the foot on the calf muscle. Now, a note of caution here is the one place we do not want to put our foot, the one that we're lifting up off the ground, is directly on the knee. That can greatly compromise the knee, so we absolutely do not want to place it there, okay? So again, we're still pressing the knee out to the side, gently kind of pressing that left foot in towards the calf muscle. You find your gazing point, and the weight is shifted onto that right foot. So again, when you pause here, find your breath, breathe deeply, stay connected to the body, and notice that a lot of the times, I definitely noticed in my yoga journey, when you see pictures of people, you're like, oh, I need to be holding that pose perfectly still. But balancing is just that. It's finding balance. So my foot is constantly kind of doing this little wiggle motion, if you will, trying to balance. So it's not a stagnant pose. You're gonna feel that little wiggle nature, okay? And then maybe you move on to the other side, you hold for a little bit. Now, once you're starting to lift that foot upward, even when the foot's on the ground, you might feel over time the ankles begin to feel a little tender, a little sore, and that's okay. We're putting more pressure than usual on the ankles when we're balancing, and in turn, the muscles grow stronger. So that little almost sensation you're feeling is a signal in the body recruiting osteoblasts, so the cells that make the bones, to come in and start to make those bones stronger for you. So breathe into it, feel into it, and there we go. I'm gonna set my foot down. So that's step B of working into tree pose. Now the full variation of tree pose is lifting the foot up and then placing it on the inner thigh. So same motion of drawing the knee out to the side, pressing the foot in, now to my thigh muscle. Again, we're not pressing it into the knee, either above or below. Hands can be at the hips, palms at heart center. You can grow the hands out like branches. And again, you find your gazing point looking towards the ground. If over time you want to challenge yourself, maybe you look up towards the ceiling, maybe you draw the eyes closed. Lots of things you can do in order to challenge yourself. Maybe you wave the hands around. You can even do circles with the hands. But again, I would strongly encourage that rather than you starting trying to balance in the full version of tree pose, right, let me find my balance first, and trying to balance in tree pose, instead you work up the leg. So I know a lot of the times we get starry-eyed and want to go all the way to the full posture. But in yoga, it's about the journey. It's about taking the steps. It's about meeting yourself where you're at. So within tree pose, start with just swinging the foot. When you're doing this, when you're putting weight just on one side, you're causing those muscles in the feet to begin to expand, begin to open. You allow the natural arc of the foot to begin to form, if you will. When we wear shoes all day, we tend to lose all that flexibility within the feet. So it takes time to gain it back. So start with swinging the feet on each side. Maybe you just work on shifting the weight over to one side, shifting the weight over to the other. That's totally fine. Then from there, maybe you practice the ankle on each side. Okay, and maybe you practice for prolonged periods of time. Maybe it takes months, maybe it takes years, who knows? This is your journey. Write it out. Find what it has in store for you. Eventually you work up the leg on each side. Notice that different sides might be different. You're not going to be a mirror on each side. They're going to have their own journey on each side. But be patient with yourself. Over time, once you practice routinely and continue to work with this posture, your feet will open up. You will gain strength not only within the feet and the ankles, but the legs as well. So find the place for you that this works in your body today and start there. You're perfect just as you are. I hope these tips helped you a bit in your tree pose journey, but please, more than anything, love your body for what it is today, because you are so amazingly perfect just as you are. A posture within yoga is not what you need to prove that to yourself. It comes from your heart and meeting yourself where you're at today. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. If you have any other questions, thoughts, comments, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to help you and your yoga, even meditation journey. Hope to see you next week. Have a wonderful week. Namaste.